All right. So we have closed captioning and the live transcript. If you are new to GER, we work to build power among elders to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights while forging solidarity with younger activists. And we want to achieve a goal of a strong multi-generational movement. Today, we are really excited for Dr. DeShawn Taylor's talk, Unapologetically Pro-Abortion. I'm going to do a very brief intro and then just hand it over to Dr. Taylor. We're really excited to have her with us. So Dr. Taylor is a gynecologist and family planning specialist, gender affirming care provider, and reproductive justice advocate who established Desert Star Family Planning Clinic in Phoenix, Arizona in 2013, and founded Desert Star Institute for Family Planning, a nonprofit organization, which she's the president of, in 2017. Recognized by the Maricopa County NAACP as a trailblazer, and most recently as a champion of choice by the National Institute for Reproductive Health, Dr. Taylor works to advance access to reproductive health care for people who can become pregnant through service provision, education, and training, advocacy, and thought leadership. We are so excited to have you here today, Dr. Taylor. Thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thanks, Kate. This has been in the making for months, I think. And the timing works out quite perfectly, doesn't it, to have this chat today. And so I am going to get my screen share here. And so the reason that I titled this topic Unapologetically Pro-Abortion is for a lot of the communication, discussion, ways that the public shared their outrage after the initial leaked draft opinion for the Dobbs case from the Supreme Court, and then ultimate overturning of Roe v. Wade through that decision. And I saw a lot of, you guys are talking about this wrong. No one's pro-abortion. I'm pro-choice. And so that has been something that I personally have evolved away from the idea of pro-choice and moving into the place of being unapologetically pro-abortion. And I'm going to make the case for you to do the same if you have not done that already. And so I want to start off with a question for you. What do you mean when you say pro-choice? And so I'd love for folks to drop some points in the chat, like, what do you mean when you say pro-choice? And I'd like to see those and read those. Or actually, Kate, if you can read those, because while I'm sharing, I'm having trouble pulling up the.
Absolutely. I'm happy to read anything that comes up in the chat. So if folks want to share in the chat, that'd be wonderful.
I found the button to actually, I found the chat. So yeah, I want to hear from folks. What do you mean when you say pro-choice? So pro-choice means bodily autonomy and always having the option to choose yourself what that may look like. Respecting a person's bodily autonomy and other personal choices for their own life. Okay. And as you're thinking about this for yourself, just drop it in the chat. It means having the freedom to actually make choices without coercion or influence. And all of these are great points for using the term pro-choice. And so continue to drop those in the chat. so that we can get an understanding of where people are in their use of this term. Rebecca just said, when I say pro-choice, I actually mean pro-abortion, and I love your unapologetically pro-abortion. And that is what I was hoping, where I was hoping someone would go, right? Pro-choice is the more socially, quote unquote, acceptable way to say in favor of abortion access. And Lisa uses pro-abortion as much as possible. And so I'm going to kind of give you, my goal today is to give you a framework from which to be able to reconcile some of what pro-choice has kind of evolved to mean from what it probably initially meant when when the term was first coined decades ago. And as with anything, times change. And our narrative and the way that we discuss things should really change with it, so that we are very clear, just like, just 5 years ago, we weren't asking people what their pronouns were. And now it's a common thing to do because we respect the humanity of non-binary people and trans people, right? So just like that, we can evolve our language in the way that we talk about abortion. And so just to give you an idea of kind of how this discussion is going to go today, I'm going to start off explaining a bit about the problem of choice. We're going to roll into a discussion of reproductive justice. And then before we go into Q&A, I want you to give yourself permission to be pro-abortion. So I think that many of us have seen this, right? It multiple times fairly recently. I know I have. I'm pro-choice, but no one is pro-abortion. And so I have a little bit of background before I ask you to start to fill in that blank about what you've heard after the but. But before you do that, I want to talk a little bit about how we got here. And so for the 5 decades after Roe v. Wade, we've continued to talk about abortion as a woman's individual right. And I specify woman because that's how we've talked about it, right? A woman's individual right to privacy, the individual's right to have abortion care without government interference, my body, my choice. And it's not wrong. It is a framework that has allowed abortion to be legal across the country up until this point. But even with Roe in place, 11 million people of reproductive age live over an hour from an abortion clinic, making legal abortion access impossible due to poverty and other restraints, right? And so since I started providing care here, abortion care in Arizona since 2009, an abortion restriction has been passed every single year except for one, and it is now 2022. This last legislative session brought us a 15-week ban that will go into effect September 24th if the pre-Roe ban that's on the books injunction stays in place. And so what good is a right to privacy if pregnant people still cannot get the legal abortions they need, especially poor people and people of color who are most hurt by these restrictions? So their choice is moot. Having a choice doesn't matter. So what it also allows us to do is create this idea of good and bad abortions. And so that's where that I'm pro-choice but comes in, where we hear this a lot. Because a majority of people who do philosophically agree that a person has an individual right to choose to have an abortion, a lot of those same people do feel okay with abortion being restricted in some way. So I want you to, if you feel, first of all, whether you feel comfortable or not, I want you to think about some of those I'm pro-choice but moments of your own, if you've had them. And I want you to think about what you've heard other people say. And whatever you're comfortable sharing in the chat, I want you to drop that in the chat. Fill in that blank. I'm pro-choice, but what have you heard people say after the but? And we are actually going to hold on to these, and I'm going to address them a little bit later in the talk. But I want you to really think about, what have you heard after that but? I'm pro-choice, but. I know some of the things I've heard. I'm pro-choice, but people shouldn't use abortion as birth control. I'm pro-choice, but why not have the baby and place it for adoption? Those are a couple of things that I've heard. And so just drop that in the chat, and I'm going to continue with a little bit more framing of this. So again, going back to the idea that a pro-choice discussion can reinforce the narrative of good versus bad abortions. So, you know, Bill Clinton was famous in saying, I want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. But why rare? Why does it need to be rare? That only stigmatizes a very common procedure, and it also gives abortion opponents the opportunity to regulate abortion care out of existence. Abortion doesn't have to be a tragedy. If a person wants to have an abortion for whatever reason, they should be able to have an abortion. They should not be shamed. They should not have to justify themselves. I want you to think about how the pro-choice narrative can cast a dark shadow of shame, guilt, and qualification that muddles the idea of choice. So I'm pro-choice, but why are those people having abortions at 30 weeks? Right. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm pro-choice, but. An author, Katha Pollitt, wrote a book called Pro. I really like that book a lot. She describes a group of people called the muddled middle. And these are the millions of Americans, more than half, who don't want to ban abortion exactly, but don't want it widely available either. It is an attitude of permit but discourage. So safe, legal, rare, right? They accept the narrative that there is grief, shame, stigma in ending pregnancies, while also claiming that it's just, there's grief, I'm saying this wrong. So there's grief and shame in ending their pregnancy, while also claiming that it's fine for others. So this dichotomy is like, you know, my abortion is different than somebody else's abortion. My abortion is just such a tragic situation. Otherwise, if there wasn't this tragedy, then maybe I wouldn't have had an abortion. So honestly, that is the narrative that gets played very often. Whenever someone's sharing an abortion story, it's, you know, my baby didn't have a head, and I had to travel out of the state. We're hearing this right now. I think it was the woman in Louisiana who had the anencephaly, which is a condition, genetic condition, where the fetus doesn't have a brain and is not going to survive outside of the pregnant person. And so we're pulling at the heartstrings and, oh my God, I can't believe that person can't get her abortion. And so this idea that you can have your abortion as long as you feel really, really bad about it. So the right to bodily autonomy, whether to have an abortion or to have and raise a child in safe conditions, was never a reality for many people. In the mainstream women's movement in the 1970s, this really centered cisgender, heterosexual, middle-class white women who actually had choices. They could stay home and be moms, or they could go to work. But then there were other people who didn't have the choice of staying at home, who had to work, or maybe wanted to actually, people were fighting to actually be moms, because also during that time there was forced sterilization of women of color. So we were kind of on these parallel tracks as women, and choice was founded in that time. And so there's a scholar, Marlene Freed, who breaks down why the narrative, the narrow focus on choice was destined to fail. And so she made 8 points that I'm going to read. 1, choice sets up a simple for against divide. Reproductive issues are more complex, involving multiple human rights issues. 2, choice is about the right not to have a child, but it ignores eugenics, population control, and the right to parent in safe communities. That is, many people are fighting for the right to have and safely raise children. 3, choice was framed as anti-government. Quote, keep the government out of our wombs in order to appeal to conservatives. Justice demands the involvement of the government. And we're seeing that now, right? With the SCOTUS decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, with that Dobbs case, we see exactly how important it was that the federal government protected our right to access abortion care, because it's been taken away very swiftly across the country without that protection. 4, choice didn't solve the problems of capitalism. If you didn't have money, you really didn't have a choice in America's privatized medical system. 5, choice is about individuals. It ignores community and social barriers that prevent people from accessing their rights. 6, choice is about people who have privilege, not the marginalized or oppressed. 7, choice is not a powerful moral argument in the face of quote unquote life. How many times have you had a conversation with someone who says, I'm pro-life? And then after you're finished talking to them, you're like, well, actually you're pro-choice, right? I think many of us have had those type of conversations with people. 8, choice is not a compelling enough vision to sustain an activist grassroots movement. And in fact, the rhetoric of choice was not enough to motivate the mainstream movement. The majority of pro-choice women remained on the sidelines while Roe was eroded, with over 1,381 restrictions over the last few decades. But then you have the anti-abortion movement waging war over quote unquote dead babies, quote unquote God's will, quote unquote Black genocide, and quote unquote murder. So we're over here, I'm pro-choice, but they're over here like, you're murdering, you're doing this, you're doing that, in the name of quote unquote life. And so we're clinging to an argument that wasn't strong on its face to begin with, and ceded a great deal of ground in the interim, right? So according to polling, 7 in 10 people, Americans support abortion rights, and 1 in 4 pregnant people will have an abortion during their lifetime, before the age of 45, particularly. So there is this kind of belief in this abstract idea of that people should be able to choose an abortion if they want to have one. And so that is what choice has meant for a lot of people, right? But again, if you don't have the means to actually follow through with the choice, do you really have a choice? And so with that, I want to shift into, we need to embrace a new framework. We cannot continue to silo abortion care into its own arena, separate from all the other issues that pregnant people face when they're making the decision by themselves, with their loved ones, with their family, about whether to continue a pregnancy or not. When we're talking about a decision to bring a child into the world, we can't talk about that without thinking about lack of childcare, unsafe housing in neighborhoods, food deserts, unreliable transportation, toxic environments, lack of health insurance, and so on. And so this framework then is a framework of justice. It's the framework of reproductive justice. And so there are 4 tenets: the right to bodily autonomy, the right to bear children, the right to not bear children, and the right to parent children in safe and sustainable communities. This is very powerful because as someone who's been providing abortion care for 21 years of my adult life, I know that people aren't making the decision to end a pregnancy in a vacuum. And the majority of people who have abortions are already parents, so they know how important their role is as parents. And the other important thing to understand is abortion is a pregnancy issue, not a parenting issue. It is part of the continuum of decisions that a pregnant person can make while they're pregnant. Understanding that a person will be pregnant if they're able to make it to term for a very long time. And their life didn't just stop evolving because they got a positive pregnancy test. So someone may have been happily looking at a positive pregnancy test at 8 weeks. And now at 18 weeks, they're in the process of a divorce, right? They already have children who are gonna have to deal with divorced parents and splitting up a household. And, oh, you've decided that you don't want to have another child with this person. You decided to divorce them, right? Or you had this really great job when you first got that positive pregnancy test, but you've been so sick during the first trimester of pregnancy that you got fired because you couldn't show up and be present and pull your weight at work. Now, do you still have the same economic position that you had to continue this pregnancy and provide for this child like you thought you would? Adoption is a parenting issue, not a pregnancy issue. Most people who continue a pregnancy and give birth do not choose adoption. Adopted children are just under 3% of the population. That's a myth, okay? So again, yes, people have choices, but also people get backed into corners based on their life experience, the curveballs that are thrown at them, right? And so we have to have a framework to incorporate that decision making. I think people were really starting to get it when you were thinking about choice in terms of bodily autonomy, right? We have the right to make decisions for ourselves that allow us to not only survive, but to thrive. And again, those decisions are made at the individual level, at the family level, at the community level. And our government has an obligation to create the conditions for people, for its citizens to be able to exercise these rights and make informed decisions. And so this term reproductive justice was coined in 1994 by a group of Black women who had attended a human rights convention and realized that this movement that was going on was really a human rights issue. And then that's how we start to get to this idea of moving beyond a person's ability to choose to bear children or not, to really the right to all of these things. And so this idea, the right to bear children or not was already part of discussion, right? But what was revolutionary was this idea that we also have the right to parent children in safe and sustainable communities. And so we could re-envision a framework of a value-led society. This was an urgent call to directly link human rights and reproductive rights. And so I am asking that you give yourself permission to be unapologetically pro-abortion. And why do I say give yourself permission? This is something that I say to my patients all the time. You have been very thoughtful, and now this is me talking to my patient. You have been very thoughtful in your decision to have an abortion. But now you're needing to reconcile some of these internal messages that you've given to yourself, the external messages that you've received from society, religion, people you love. But you know what is best for you in this moment in time, in your family, and you're standing in that. So give yourself permission to be okay with your decision to have an abortion today, because you've already decided. And so giving yourself permission to be okay, to not persecute your own self, to not allow someone else to persecute you because of what they believe. They're not the one pregnant. They're not the one who's going to be parenting at the end of it. Even if it was your boyfriend or husband or mother, it's you. And so in reconciling all of that, those opposing forces and information, right, is at the core of it, giving yourself permission to be okay. And so you guys are getting it wrong. No one's pro-abortion, really? You're probably pro-abortion, right? But as someone said in the chat, it's saying that I'm pro-choice is the socially acceptable jargon. It's radical, right, to be pro-abortion. Why is it radical to be pro-abortion? And so I want you to think for yourself, answer this question for yourself privately. And if you're comfortable, share in the chat. What makes you uncomfortable with the term pro-abortion? What makes you uncomfortable about the term pro-abortion? If you've had some discomfort, if you yourself, have thought, fear of retaliation, why does the idea of being pro-abortion, why is it off-putting? Lingering Catholic guilt? That's a big one. And as you start to kind of think about this for yourself, and you feel comfortable, continue to drop your responses in the chat. Abortion is common. It's every day. 1 in 4 people capable of giving birth will choose to have one at some point in their life. We all know and love someone who's had an abortion. And if you don't know that about someone, the shame and stigma is real. I see Nico put, being pro-abortion makes other people feel justified in attacking my sense of ethics, morality. And that's a great segue into my next statement. I believe that abortion is a positive moral choice. Because all people who can become pregnant want to thrive, right? Not just survive. Just yesterday, I bring up divorce because this person told me yesterday, I should have divorced my husband 3 years ago, but when I was about to file for divorce, then I was pregnant. Now we're going through a divorce right now, and once again, I'm pregnant. I will not have another child with this man. This divorce needs to happen. I have been miserable for 5 years. My children don't deserve this. Life begins at conception. Do you know that that was not always the Catholic faith's position? That evolved over time. And it also evolved within the time that of the rise of the evangelicals and Christian nationalism. The church has been a tool to push this world that we live in, this anti-abortion rhetoric. And it has been very harmful to a lot of people. I am a provider of faith. I probably attend church more than the average number of times that my patients who come to the clinic with crosses around their neck do. And that's not a judgment, it's a fact. And over 60% of people who have abortions have a faith, and they do have their abortion anyway. And my faith allows me to provide abortion care in a just, dignified, and exceptional manner, centering their humanity. And the fact that they are living and breathing, also respecting the potential of the life that they are carrying within them, and ascribing the value to that they themselves prescribe to it. But also knowing that the persecution from religion is very harmful. And people who believe that life begins at conception now, then also are persecuted when they have miscarriages, because they must have done something wrong for God to take this life. Up to 20% of clinically recognized pregnancies end in miscarriage. So my goodness, so many people feel that God hates them because they had a miscarriage, right? Because life begins at conception. God is persecuting them for their infertility. Oh my God, God has made my womb barren because I can't have children. Because if I can't conceive naturally, then I am not the righteousness of God. He doesn't love me. Right. So there are a lot of faith traditions that have different beliefs about when life begins. And I also want people to know that the Catholic Church didn't always believe that life began at conception. So why did that change over time? I want you to sit with that for yourselves. When we say abortion saves lives, it literally saves lives, right? There are people, I personally have provided an abortion for a dying woman, and then she walked out of the hospital alive to her children she already had at home. So yes, and of course people want that. But before I did that 22-week abortion that saved that woman's life, I had done like 300 of them over 20 weeks. Those people deserve their abortion just as much. And it gave me the experience to be able to save that one woman's life, literally save her life. But abortion saves the lives in the sense of saving the life that someone has that will be completely derailed should they not get their abortion. People get to create the lives and families that they want for themselves. They do not have to throw all of that away because they become unintentionally pregnant. They do not have to sacrifice the goals and plans about the type of person that they want to be in this world, how they want to contribute to society, the type of parent they want to be because they want to finish college, they want to have a home, not be living in their parents' basement. They want to be able to provide for their children and not be a drain on society, not be on welfare, not have to embarrassingly use an EBT card at the grocery store, or people are like judging them about the food choices, like, oh my God, they're getting steak with that EBT card and I don't have steak in my refrigerator. Right? People get to create the families they want in the conditions that they want. Right. Pull themselves out of the cycle of poverty. I had a 17-year-old. Her mother had her at 16, her grandmother had her mother at 16, and they're trying to force her to have her now she's 17, they're trying to force her. I will not, I will go to college. I will start my family when I can afford to be the best parent and take care of my children. She fought for that. She went and got a judicial bypass for that. So I want to leave us time for questions and answers. The content of what I shared with you today is inspired by a book that will be published soon, my book. It's been a labor of love here for the last few months. It's been very cathartic to be able to write this because it's been very challenging times we've been living in. And so at some point before this is over, I'll drop a link in the chat for you to sign up for interest if you're interested in knowing when the book is published. I would like to stop sharing at this point and just take maybe 3 of those initial I'm pro-choice but responses that you collected for me, Kate, so we can kind of dissect them a little bit, and then we'll take questions from the audience.
Yeah, we had quite a few. So we did more than once have folks say, I'm pro-choice, but I would never have one for myself. I'm pro-choice, but people shouldn't use it as birth control. I'm pro-choice, but within reason. I'm pro-choice, but not far along in pregnancy. You know, there's a cutoff for people about when abortions are okay. And I'm trying to find the other one. I'm pro-choice, but no one would choose it unless they really had to. Those are some of the ones that we got.
Yeah. So I will be transparent that even as an abortion provider myself, the multiple abortions was a sticking point for me. And I remember I was in a conference and someone made a comment, abortion is safe. It's safer than continuing the pregnancy going through childbirth, so why do we care? And it was like an aha moment, like, why do I care? It's like, and that final little bit of judgment in myself just went away. Like, abortion is safer, no matter how many times someone does it. It's safer than continuing a pregnancy and going through childbirth. And whether or not someone is quote unquote using it for birth control is not my business. My job is to make sure people have safe abortion and that they're treated well. There's a lot of harm that's undone in my clinic, even from other abortion providers and things that they say to people. The other important part of this is whether you would have an abortion yourself is irrelevant. Why do you care about somebody else's abortion so much, right? So that's another point, like, why does somebody else's abortion matter so much to you? Right. Continuing a pregnancy and going through childbirth is 12 to 16 times more dangerous to a pregnant person than having an abortion. Right. So when we say that, you know, there are certain types of people who are more impacted by restrictions. If you think about how just in general, pregnancy is dangerous. And then you think about the people who have health conditions on top of that. I remember I had a moment where I tweeted, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. With these restrictions, they're legitimately trying to kill us. Right. I mean, why can't I walk that out to its most logical conclusion? And then the within reason. What reason? What's reason? So I know that is probably in relation to the 3rd trimester abortions, most likely, right? And I think that those are a sticking point even for the most devout folks who are pro-abortion. But you have to remember that that is placing value on the fetus, more value on the fetus than the pregnant person that's carrying it, right? Being pro-abortion means that you're not thinking about why a person shouldn't have an abortion. You're thinking about, should a birth occur? Right? Should a birth occur? And when you look at it that way, then you're looking at the person who's pregnant and it's their decision. Should a birth occur? And when they're presented for an abortion at 30 weeks, their answer is no. And it's their choice. It's their life. It's their body. It's their family. It's not yours. It's not your business. Are you going to pay for the food that that child needs to eat? Are you going to pay for the transportation to get that child to school? Are you going to pay for the clothes that that person needs to buy for the next 18 years of that child's life? Why are you so invested? Okay. So I think that covered those main swaths of what, I mean, having an abortion. I mean, the thing is this, no one's thinking to themselves like, oh my God, I'm gonna have 3 abortions in a year, right? Nobody's really like thinking about that, because that's, even if you pay for an IUD out of pocket, that's more expensive than paying for an IUD out of your pocket, right? But the thing is, nobody's thinking about that. People are like, I'm pregnant right now, I don't want to be. And then, life is happening, right? So, I mean, it's just like, we got to let that go. And so, yeah, let's open up for some questions. I see some other good stuff in the chat. I think even not touching who raises a child, this idea of forcing birth when someone ignores that pregnancy, labor, and birth is significant for people emotionally, physically, economically, and socially. Absolutely. Society has normalized forcing folks having babies. It's looked as the punishment for being irresponsible. Now deal with your decision. But if we think how many people and women who have forcefully parented throughout the centuries, it's normalized to torture bodies and force them to be a parent no matter what. Absolutely.
I know someone sends a message to me, but they meant to send it to everyone. So I'm going to read that one. And so Jennifer had shared, my husband feels that men endanger themselves as soldiers and in dangerous jobs for the good of society. It is only fair for pregnant women to endanger themselves by bearing children for the good of society. I don't agree with him, but I think many anti-abortion people do. That's intense.
That's intense. But here's the thing. The draft, they got rid of the draft, right? And why did the United States end the draft, right? Because this idea of forcing people into war to lose their lives just wasn't cool anymore, right? So that argument no longer holds. People are making a clear decision to enlist, to potentially put themselves in harm's way for their country. The draft doesn't exist anymore. So that's my answer to that one.
I would just add that the kind of draft we have now has so much to do with classism, poverty, people going into the military because they are without other options. And that, that is a way that we don't officially have a draft. But when we think about, some people are also kind of coerced by their circumstances to have abortions that they might not otherwise have because of poverty, because of other things, right? So that is where reproductive justice gets us to look at all of those important issues so that people really can make their own decisions, not coerced by oppression or individuals.
Absolutely. That is a great point. Choices are taken away by circumstances. Yes. And so, were there anything that you saw, Kate, in the chat that we should raise up in these last few minutes here? And also, if there are any additional questions or comments that you would like for me to specifically address, I will share that in my book, I have a chapter on the myth of the carefree pregnancy and the the myth of motherhood, and it is that standard of which a lot of these regulations and restrictions, societal kind of ideology is created, in that it is this white, middle class, cisgender, heterosexual woman who is the epitome of grace and selflessness, that she brings forth all of these children into the world and stays home to take care of them and raise them. And she's so happy to be pregnant that she's glowing and doing yoga and, you know, all these wonderful things that we see on TV and on, you know, social media. And, you know, and so that is what's lifted up, and that is the target, that's the goal, right? And I remember giving a talk sometime last year about, what was it, the Leave It to Beaver? Was June Cleaver really happy? We have this term wine time for a reason, I think. It's wine o'clock somewhere. You guys see that those propaganda of like women with wine bottles in the middle of the day in their nice, pretty dresses, in their high heels, happily wife and mother, but day drinking, right? Like that, they were day drinking. Why were they day drinking? So it wasn't that wonderful as people would like to think, right? Because otherwise people wouldn't be day drinking when they're supposed to be taking care of their children at home. So
I guess I would love to ask in closing, Dr. Taylor, you know, we're in this moment where we are losing so much ground in a lot of ways, right? And it seems like sometimes when we're losing ground, there's this instinct to placate, to play to the lowest common denominator, to try to make our messages more palatable, which is why I'm so moved by, you know, your insistence that we talk about being pro-abortion. And I just wonder if you can speak to that piece of it, like the push for us to mellow our message when it feels like the most important time to be bolder in our message. And how do you kind of respond to folks who want to play to that lowest common denominator in this moment?
So Roe v. Wade was definitely an important time, an important decision for its time. We're 50 years removed from that time. And so, and we had chipping away over this whole time. Like, we didn't improve it. We didn't make it better, right? We didn't create systems for people to have more meaningful access to abortion care. We still had the Hyde Amendment, right? Where, you know, people, you know, couldn't use their, in a lot of places, people can't use Medicaid to pay for their abortion. Arizona is one of those. So, you know, we kind of got that and then kind of fell back a large majority of advocates. And so now that Roe is gone, we don't want to rush to recodify that. We want to envision something better. And so when you can say the word abortion, when you can say that I believe that people should have access to abortions, when you say that people should not have to travel 100, 200 miles in their own state to have an abortion, when you say that people should be able to use whatever insurance that they have, whether it's state or commercial, to pay for their abortion, when you say that if people don't have those things, that the cost of an abortion should be affordable. Honestly, when you say all this, you say that we need universal health care, and abortion is health care and should be included in that, right? So, you know, that's what pro-abortion means. And so this policing about political correctness and all of this, like, you have to push back. You have to say, I believe that a person, regardless of their situation or circumstance, if they decide that they want to have an abortion, then they should be able to have it. Full stop. That's what pro-abortion means. I'm an abortion provider. I'm not going and knocking on people's doors to say, come to my clinic and have an abortion. Like, really? Like, no, that's a ridiculous idea. But people need something from me. I have the means to provide it and the experience to provide it to them, so I'm doing that. So, this idea that we're going out handing out abortions to people, like, oh, I'm pro-abortion, have an abortion, like, that's just ridiculous. But I think that's what's in some people's minds. I see the time here. I had sent this link to myself, and now I can't find it. Oh, here it is. I just want to drop this really quickly before people start signing off. That if you want to sign up for interest in knowing when my book publishes.
Yes, and Gur will share that out as well. I'm really excited to hear that you're putting out a book, and we are at our time. And I will reshare that link, Dr. Taylor, but I just want to thank you so much for taking time to be with us today, and for all of you who showed up. There was such a lively discussion in the chat, and people sharing their own experiences, and we just really appreciate your vulnerability, your investment, and I hope everybody's leaving today excited to talk about being pro-abortion with everybody in your life. So thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for your work as a provider and for today. We are very, very appreciative.
Thank you for having me. You guys have a great rest of your day. And until next time.
Thank you.